The words hit me before their meaning fully landed. Melis, I think it's best if you leave. My father's voice cut across the dining room with the same cold precision he used in courtrooms. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It carried authority, finality, judgment. The crystal chandelier above us seemed to dim. Or maybe that was just my vision narrowing, my body reacting before my mind could catch up. My fingers tightened around the stem of my wine glass until I thought it might crack in my hand. The soft chatter that had filled the room moments earlier died instantly. Forks froze midair. Conversations collapsed into silence. My sister Lauren's perfectly practiced smile flickered just for a second. My brother Bryce suddenly became very interested in his plate. And then, like a wave, every eye in the room turned toward me. Some looked confused, most looked like they had been waiting for this. My father stood at the head of the long dining table, his glass still raised mid-toast. His expression was calm, composed, almost bored, like he had just dismissed an irrelevant argument. Like I was something to be handled and removed. That's when it clicked. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't emotion, this was planned. The formal invitation, the insistence that I attend. The seating arrangement that placed Jonah and me at the far end of the table. Next to Aunt Marlene, who had spent 20 minutes asking if Jonah was my driver. Every detail had been carefully orchestrated. This wasn't a family dinner, it was a performance, and I was the final act, a public dismissal disguised as a celebration. My name is Melis Harper, I'm 34 years old, and I'm a publishing director. And this is the story of how I stopped begging for a seat at a table that was never meant for me. I stood up slowly, because what else was I supposed to do? My napkin slipped from my lap and fell to the floor, but I didn't pick it up. I couldn't, my hands had gone numb. My throat felt tight, like it was closing in on itself, but I wasn't crying, not yet. I had learned that skill a long time ago, how to swallow humiliation in front of the Harper family, how to keep my face neutral while something inside me cracked. It wasn't just a habit. It was survival, and I had practiced it for years. Then I heard it, the sharp scrape of a chair against hardwood. Jonah, my husband, stood up beside me. And something about him changed the air in the room. There was a tension in his posture, controlled, contained, but unmistakable. The kind of tension that made people pay attention. The kind that made powerful people uncomfortable. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking directly at my father, steady, unflinching. Actually, Jonah said quietly, lifting his glass, I'd like to make a toast. My father's jaw tightened. This isn't your place, he replied. Jonah didn't flinch. That's debatable, he said evenly. But tonight I seemed to be the only one acting like family. The room went completely still. Even the air felt heavy, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. And inside me, something shifted. At first, it felt like relief, like someone had finally stepped in, but then it sharpened into something else, something stronger, anger, clear, focused. Long overdue, because this moment didn't start tonight. It started 34 years ago, the day I was born into the wrong kind of family. I was the kind of Harper who loved stories, not stock portfolios. Not courtrooms, not prestige. Stories. I cared about people, about voices, about meaning. I measured success by impact, by how something made someone feel. My father measured success by power. By status, by control. And in his world I had failed before I even began. My father, Gerald Harper, built his career as a litigation partner. He was known for dismantling arguments with surgical precision. In court, he was respected. At home, he was absolute. Love wasn't something he gave freely, it was something you earned. Through achievement, through perfection, through becoming exactly what he believed you should be. My siblings learned that early. They adapted, they performed. Bryce, my older brother, became everything my father admired: athletic, disciplined, ambitious. He went to law school, graduated with honors, and now worked at my father's old firm, climbing the ranks exactly as expected. Lauren followed a different path, but one equally impressive. Cardiothoracic surgery, because of course she did, precision, excellence, prestige. She thrived in it, they both did, and they were rewarded for it, praised, celebrated, displayed. And then there was me, the disappointment that didn't quite fit. I was 8 years old when I won my first writing contest. I still remember the way my hands shook as I carried the certificate home. I had folded it carefully, smoothing out the edges so it would look perfect when I showed him. I found my father in his study. He barely looked up. Dad, I said, holding it out to him, I won. He took the paper, glanced at it for less than 2 seconds, then handed it back. Writing doesn't pay the bills. That was it, no smile. No congratulations, no pride, just dismissal. I stood there for a moment waiting, hoping he'd say something else. He didn't, and something inside me shifted, not loudly, not dramatically. Just quietly enough that no one noticed. Except me. That was the moment I started learning what I was worth in his eyes, and it didn't get better. It didn't happen all at once. That kind of realization never does. It builds slowly, piece by piece, moment by moment, until one day you look back and realize you've been shrinking yourself for years. After that first dismissal, I started paying attention to what earned approval, to what didn't. Bryce brought home trophies, my father displayed them in his office. Lauren aced her exams, he took her out to dinner, just the two of them. I wrote stories, I stopped showing them. By the time I reached high school, I had already learned the rules. Don't speak unless it adds value, don't share anything that can be dismissed, don't expect praise, and most importantly, don't need too much. Needing things in the Harper household was a weakness. But even then, some part of me still hoped that maybe one day, if I just tried hard enough, he would see me. I got good grades. Not because I loved the subjects, but because I thought achievement might translate, might bridge the gap, might finally make him look at me the way he looked at Bryce and Lauren. It didn't. Because it wasn't about effort, it was about direction, and I was heading the wrong way. The breaking point came my freshman year of college. I had been accepted into a business program. Of course I had, it was expected, encouraged, planned. My father had already started talking about internships, connections, future firms, it was all mapped out, a clean, predictable path. A Harper path. I lasted one semester. I remember sitting in a lecture hall, staring at a slide full of market projections and profit margins, feeling something inside me go completely still. Not overwhelmed, not confused, just empty, like I was watching someone else's life unfold, like I had stepped into a role that didn't belong to me. That same week, I wandered into a literature class. I wasn't even enrolled, I just sat in the back listening. The professor was talking about how stories shape identity, how narratives give people permission to exist, how words can change the way we see ourselves and each other. And for the first time in months, I felt something, not obligation, not pressure, but recognition. I switched my major the following week, from business to English literature. I told my father over the phone. I remember standing outside my dorm, pacing back and forth, rehearsing the conversation in my head, trying to make it sound reasonable, logical, defensible. He didn't let me finish. If you're going to chase dreams, he said flatly, you can do it on your own dime. The line went dead, that was it. No discussion, no compromise, just a clean surgical cut. My college funding disappeared overnight. Tuition, housing, everything gone. I cried that night. Of course I did. I wasn't strong yet. I wasn't independent yet. I was 19, terrified and suddenly on my own. But I didn't change my major. Instead, I got a job, then another, mornings at a cafe, evenings shelving books at a campus bookstore. Late nights studying in between. I learned how to stretch every dollar, how to function on 4 hours of sleep, how to carry exhaustion like it was normal, and slowly something unexpected happened. I started to build a life that was mine, not impressive by my father's standards, not polished, not easy, but real. I graduated with honors not because anyone expected it. Not because anyone was watching, but because I refused to fail on my own terms. I sent my father an announcement, just a simple message. I graduated honors, he replied 2 days later. Noted, that was the entire message. I stared at it for a long time, reading it over and over again, as if more words might appear, as if meaning might expand. It didn't. And somehow that hurt more than silence, because it confirmed something I had been trying not to accept. Nothing I did would ever be enough, still I kept trying. Through my 20s, I became an expert at minimizing myself, at fitting into spaces that were never designed for me. Family dinners, holiday gatherings, formal events like the one tonight. I learned how to translate my life into something more acceptable. Instead of saying I worked in publishing, I said I worked with business clients. Instead of talking about authors, I talked about market trends. I reshaped my world into something that sounded closer to theirs. It didn't work because they weren't listening, not really. I was background noise, a polite obligation, a presence to be tolerated, not engaged, and the worst part, I accepted it. Because some part of me still believed that if I just tried a little harder, a little longer, a little better, they would finally let me belong. I didn't realize how much I had been settling until I met Jonah. It was a Tuesday, rainy, the kind of quiet afternoon where the world feels slower, softer. I had stopped by a small independent bookstore after work, more out of habit than intention. Books had always been my refuge, the one place where I didn't feel like I had to explain myself. He was standing in the fiction section, holding two books, reading the back covers like he was making a life-altering decision. His brow was slightly furrowed, completely focused. It made me smile. He noticed, looked up, caught me, and instead of looking away awkwardly, he grinned. "Help me decide?" he asked, holding up both books. That was it, that was the beginning. We ended up sitting in the corner of the store talking about stories, about characters, about why certain endings stay with you long after the book is closed. 1 hour turned into 3. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was performing. I didn't have to adjust my words or filter my thoughts or make myself smaller. He listened, not to respond, not to judge. but because he genuinely cared about what I had to say. That alone felt unfamiliar. When he asked me what I did, I told him the truth. I work in publishing. No hesitation, no translation. No apology, and instead of dismissing it, he leaned in. That's incredible, he said. You help bring stories into the world. I had never heard it described like that before. Not as something small, not as something impractical, but as something meaningful, something valuable, something worth being proud of. And just like that, without even trying, Jonah saw me. Not the version of me my family tolerated, not the version I had learned to present, but me. After that day in the bookstore, Jonah didn't disappear. He didn't fade into a nice memory or become one of those almost connections that never quite turn into anything real. He stayed. He texted me that same evening. I'm still thinking about that ending you mentioned. Coffee this week. It was simple, no games, no waiting 3 days, no pretending not to care. And somehow that felt more meaningful than anything grand. We met again 2 days later, then again that weekend, then again the week after that. It wasn't dramatic. There were no sweeping declarations or cinematic moments, just consistency. He showed up every time, and slowly, without realizing it, I started to relax. With Jonah, conversations didn't feel like tests. There were no right answers, no invisible standards I had to meet. I could say what I actually thought, admit when I didn't know something. Laugh without wondering if it sounded right. It felt safe. One night, about a month in, we were walking back from dinner when it started raining. Not a light drizzle, a full, sudden downpour. We ran for cover under the awning of a closed shop, both of us laughing, slightly out of breath. You always this dramatic, he teased. Only when the weather cooperates, I shot back. There was a pause, not awkward, just quiet, and then he looked at me, really looked. You don't have to try so hard, you know, he said gently. The words hit something deep. What do you mean? I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. He shrugged slightly, like he wasn't trying to make a big statement. You always sound like you're editing yourself. Like you're making sure everything comes out right. I froze, because he was right. I had been doing it for so long I didn't even notice anymore. That obvious? I tried to laugh it off. Only because I pay attention, he said. Not judgment, not criticism, just observation, and something inside me softened. Habit, I admitted. Old one. He nodded like that made perfect sense. Must be exhausting. It was, I just had never said it out loud before. Yeah, I whispered. He didn't ask me to explain, didn't push, didn't analyze. He just stood there with me in the rain, sharing the silence like it was enough. And somehow it was. That was the moment I started to trust him, not because he fixed anything, but because he didn't try to, he just made space. And in that space, I started to feel like myself again. Months passed, then a year, and for the first time in my life, love didn't feel conditional. It wasn't something I had to earn, or maintain, or prove. It was just there, steady, reliable, real. Jonah didn't come from money, or status, or anything my family would have considered impressive. His father was a union electrician. His mother was a public school art teacher, but when I met them, they welcomed me like I had always belonged. No evaluation, no quiet judgment, no measuring. Just warmth. His mom hugged me the first time we met. Not a polite, distant hug, a real one, the kind that says you're safe here. His dad shook my hand, then pulled me into a half hug like he'd known me for years. Any friend of Jonas's family, he said. Family. The word landed differently there. Not as something you had to earn, but something you were given, freely, unconditionally. And that's when I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Not like a performance review, not like a constant test, not like something that could be taken away the moment you failed to meet expectations. But something steady, something kind, something that didn't ask you to become someone else. So when Jonah proposed a year later, I didn't hesitate. There was no fear, no doubt, just certainty. Yes, I said before he could even finish asking. We got married 6 months later. It was a small wedding, simple, intentional. Jonah's family was there, of course. His mom cried through the entire ceremony. His dad kept pretending he had something in his eye. My side, different, my father didn't come. He said he had a prior commitment. Bryce sent a short text. Congrats, busy that weekend. Lauren sent flowers, no note, that was it, no apology, no explanation, just absence. But standing there, holding Jonah's hands, surrounded by people who actually wanted to be there for the first time, I didn't feel like something was missing. I felt chosen. And that changed everything. Because once you know what real love feels like, you can't unlearn it. You can't go back to accepting less, even if part of you still tries, and I did try. For years after that, I still showed up to family events, still answered calls, still played the role, not because they deserved it, but because some part of me still hoped that maybe one day something would change. And then the invitation arrived, 3 weeks before that dinner, thick ivory cardstock, my father's monogram pressed into the corner in gold foil. Harper family celebration, formal attire required. Immediate family only, no explanation, no warmth, no note, just an expectation. I held it in my hands longer than I should have. You don't have to go, Jonah said gently, watching me from across the room. I nodded, I know, and I did, but there it was again, that quiet, stubborn hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this was his way of reaching out. Maybe he was finally ready to see me, so I said yes. I bought a dress, dark green satin, simple but elegant. I got my hair done, carefully, precisely. On the drive there, I rehearsed conversations in my head, polite responses, safe topics, all the things I had learned to say to make myself easier to accept. When we arrived, the house looked exactly the same. Beautiful, immaculate, impersonal. The place that used to feel like home now felt like a museum. And I didn't realize it yet, but I was about to walk into the moment that would finally set me free. The moment we stepped inside, I knew nothing had changed. Soft jazz drifted through the air. The lighting was warm, carefully curated, everything looked perfect, but it felt cold. Lauren stood near the fireplace in a deep red silk dress, surrounded by a small circle of people, laughing lightly as if she owned the room. Bryce was across from her, talking to two of my father's colleagues, his posture confident, practiced, already belonging in a world I had never been allowed into. No one came to greet us. Not my father, not my siblings, a house full of people, and not one of them had been waiting for me. Jonah's hand brushed lightly against mine, not grabbing, not pulling, just there, steady. I'm right here, he murmured. I nodded, plastering on the same polite smile I'd worn my entire life in rooms like this. We stepped further inside, a few people acknowledged us. Quick nods. Brief smiles, the kind reserved for acquaintances, not family. Melis, someone said, like they had just remembered I existed. And then they moved on. I tried. God, I tried. I joined a conversation near the bar. They were talking about a recent court case, something high profile, something complex. I listened for a moment, then offered a small comment. Careful, measured. Relevant, no one responded. Not even a glance. The conversation simply continued as if I hadn't spoken at all, like I wasn't there. I felt that familiar tightening in my chest. That quiet, creeping awareness, you don't belong here. I stepped back, smiled, pretended it didn't matter. Across the room, I saw my father. He was laughing, actually laughing. One hand resting casually on Bryce's shoulder, the picture of pride. I couldn't remember the last time he had looked at me like that, if he ever had. Hey, Jonah said softly, leaning closer. We can leave. The words were gentle, an offer, not a suggestion. I shook my head. Let's just get through dinner, because that's what I had always done, endured. Dinner was announced shortly after, and that's when the truth became impossible to ignore. The place cards, they were set with intention, precision, hierarchy, my father at the head of the table. Lauren to his right, Bryce to his left, of course, and then at the far end, Jonah and me next to Aunt Marlene. She smiled vaguely as we sat down. Then leaned toward me and whispered, loud enough for others to hear, "And this is your driver." I felt Jonah still beside me just for a second. Then he smiled politely. Something like that, he said. I wanted to disappear, but I didn't because I had spent too many years disappearing. Dinner began, plates were served, wine was poured, and conversation flowed. Just not toward me, my father spoke at length about Bryce's recent case, praised his strategy, his leadership, his future. Everyone listened, nodded, engaged, then Lauren, her latest surgical success. A complex procedure, lives saved, recognition earned, more admiration, more attention, more pride. I sat 30 feet away and felt like I was watching through glass. Jonah tried to include me. Asked me questions, pulled me into small conversations, but it didn't matter because the room had already decided who mattered, and it wasn't me. Then came the toast. My father stood, glass raised. The room quieted instantly. He spoke about legacy, about excellence, about discipline, about what it meant to carry the Harper name, and then he looked at me, not fully, not directly, but enough. There are those, he said smoothly, who choose different paths. A small pause, paths that don't necessarily align with the values this family was built on. A few people shifted in their seats. I felt my pulse in my throat, and while we wish them well, he continued, his voice cool, controlled, not everyone belongs at every table. Silence. Then he set his glass down slightly. Turned toward me fully and said it. Melis, I think it's best if you leave. Just like that, no emotion, no hesitation, like he was removing something inconvenient. The room froze. And for a moment, so did I. This was it. This was the moment I had been preparing for my entire life without realizing it. I stood slowly. My body felt light, almost detached. Like I was watching myself from a distance. My napkin slipped to the floor. I didn't pick it up. I didn't say anything because what was there left to say? Then Jonah's chair scraped back. Loud. Sharp, impossible to ignore. He stood beside me and everything changed. Actually, he said calmly, lifting his glass, I'd like to make a toast. My father's expression hardened instantly. This isn't your place. Jonah didn't even blink. That's debatable, he replied. But tonight I'm the only one acting like family. The air shifted, people straightened, eyes widened. No one spoke. Jonah's voice stayed steady, controlled, but underneath it there was steel. To the woman you just tried to dismiss, he said, raising his glass slightly. My wife Melis, something in my chest tightened. He turned slightly toward me, then back to my father. You say tonight is about people who matter, he continued. So let's talk about who actually matters. No one moved, no one interrupted. Melis built her life without a safety net, he said. After you cut her off, she worked 2 jobs while finishing her degree. A murmur, quiet, uneasy. She didn't just survive, he went on. She succeeded. I felt my breath catch. She's helped launch careers, given voices to people who have never been heard. Built something real, something meaningful without your approval, without your support. My father's grip tightened around his glass. But none of that matters to you, Jonah said. Because you don't measure success by impact, a beat, you measure it by control. The silence deepened. And when she refused to become what you wanted, he added, his voice sharper now, you didn't just dismiss her, you erased her. No one looked comfortable anymore. And to the rest of you, Jonah said, turning slightly toward the table, if this feels awkward, it should. A few people looked down. You just watched a father humiliate his daughter, he said. In public, and you said nothing. The words landed hard, some of you even smiled. That was the moment everything cracked open, not just the silence, me. Because for the first time, someone had said it, out loud, no sugarcoating, no pretending, just truth, and I realized something in that moment. I wasn't alone, I never had been. The silence after Jonah's words felt different, heavier, not empty anymore, charged, like something had finally been exposed and no one knew how to cover it back up. Jonah lowered his glass slowly. Then he looked at me and everything in his expression softened. But here's what actually matters, he said quietly. Melis, I see you, my breath caught. I've always seen you, he continued. Not as the daughter who failed someone else's expectations, a pause, but as the woman who had the courage to define herself. Something inside me broke open, not pain, not this time. Something else, recognition. For the first time in my life, I felt understood, fully, completely. Jonah turned back to my father. You told her to leave, he said calmly. Fine, he set his glass down with quiet precision, then we'll both leave. A small ripple moved through the room, but don't confuse your silence for authority, he added. You may control this house, his voice hardened just slightly, but you do not get to define her worth. And with that he reached for my hand, warm, steady, certain, and that's when it hit me. I wasn't being thrown out, I was being given a choice, and for the first time I was ready to make it. But I didn't move, not yet, because something inside me wasn't finished. Not after years of silence, not after everything I had swallowed. I gently slipped my hand from Jonah S. He didn't stop me, he just nodded like he understood. I turned and faced my father. Really faced him, not as a child waiting for approval, not as someone trying to avoid conflict, but as myself. My voice, when it came, surprised me, it didn't shake. Do you know what's funny, Dad? I said. The word dad felt strange in my mouth. I spent 34 years thinking something was wrong with me. The room stayed silent, no interruptions, no dismissals. That if I just worked harder, achieved more, became someone different, I swallowed once. You might finally love me. A flicker crossed his face, small, quick, but there I let out a quiet breath. But tonight made something very clear. I looked around the table, at every face that had watched, that had stayed silent. You can't love what you don't respect. My voice sharpened slightly. And you've never respected anything that didn't look exactly like you. A shift in the room, subtle but real. I turned toward Bryce. He straightened immediately. How many times did you use my work? I asked calmly, his brow furrowed. My marketing analysis, I clarified, for your pitches, 3 times, 4, his face flushed. You never mentioned where it came from, I continued. You just presented it and took the credit. A few heads turned. Bryce opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, he had nothing to say. I turned to Lauren, her posture had gone rigid. Remember Mom's last few weeks? I asked softly, her eyes widened. When you told the hospice team I was too emotional to be involved in decisions, a sharp inhale from somewhere at the table. You had me removed from her care, I said. My own mother, Lauren looked down. I barely got to say goodbye. The words landed harder than anything else I had said because they were true and everyone knew it. Then I turned back to my father. You taught them this, I said, not loudly, not angrily, just clearly. That cruelty is acceptable as long as it's polite. No one moved. That exclusion is fine as long as it's dressed up in formal dinners and nice words. I picked up my purse slowly. But I'm done being your example, I said. My voice was steady now, grounded. Done being the warning story of what happens when a Harper doesn't perform correctly. My father's expression had changed, not much, but enough. There was something new there, not anger. Not control, fear. I've been documenting everything, I said. The room went completely still again. Every dismissal, every exclusion, every time you told Mom not to encourage me. A beat. I'm writing a memoir. This time the reaction was visible. My father's composure cracked just slightly. It's not revenge, I added quietly. It's truth. I looked around the table one last time. About what it's like to grow up in a family where love is conditional. My gaze landed on Lauren, then Bryce. You'll both be in it. Neither of them spoke. Every comment, every silence. Every moment you chose comfort over honesty. The weight of it settled over the room. I'm not changing names. The words were soft but final. I turned toward the door. Jonah was already there. Waiting, not leading, not pulling, just standing beside me. My father's voice cut through the silence. If you publish that, he said sharply, you will be cut off. Completely, I didn't turn around, because for the first time I didn't need to see his reaction. Your money was never what I needed, I said, a pause. Your love was. I reached for the door. And that expired a long time ago. The door closed behind us with a soft click, and just like that it was over, or maybe it had finally begun. Outside, the night air felt different, cleaner. Lighter, like I could finally breathe, but then my hands started shaking, not from fear, from release, from everything I had held in for 34 years finally breaking free. Jonah opened the car door for me. Hey, he said softly once we were inside. You okay? I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I think so, I said, and then I laughed. A real laugh, unexpected, uncontrolled. I'm writing that book, I said, almost in disbelief. I'm actually doing it. Jonah smiled, not surprised. I know, he said. I saw it the moment you decided. And for the first time in my life, I believed in my own voice. The next morning didn't feel real. For a few seconds after I woke up, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, caught in that strange space between sleep and memory. Then it all came rushing back. The dinner, the silence. Jonah's voice cutting through it, my father's face, my own words. I sat up slowly, my heart starting to pound. Hey, Jonah's voice came from the doorway, soft, careful. He was holding 2 mugs of tea. Thought you might need this, he said, stepping inside. I took the cup from him, wrapping my hands around it like I needed something solid to hold onto. Thank you, I whispered. He studied my face for a moment. Any regrets? He asked gently. I thought about it, really thought about it, the confrontation, the truth, the finality of it all. And for the first time, my answer came easily. No. It surprised me a little, but it was true, not because it hadn't been painful, it had, but because it had also been necessary. Jonah nodded like he had expected that answer. I'm proud of you, he said, 3 simple words, but they landed deeper than anything my father had ever said to me. I hesitated, then let out a small breath. I think I feel lighter, he smiled slightly. Yeah, he said. That's what happens when you stop carrying things that were never yours to hold. I let that sink in, then I reached for my phone, and immediately wished I hadn't. 17 notifications. Missed calls, messages, all from family. I stared at the screen for a long moment before opening the first one. Bryce, that was unnecessary, short, dismissive, predictable. Next, Lauren. You've always made everything about you. I almost laughed. Of course she would say that, because in her version of reality, my pain was always an inconvenience. The rest followed the same pattern. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family should stay private. You went too far, he's still your father, you should apologize. Not one message asked if I was okay. Not one acknowledged what had actually happened. Just concern for the image, the reputation, the discomfort. I felt something settle inside me, not anger, clarity. I set my phone down for a moment. Then picked it back up and started blocking numbers. One by one, no announcement, no explanation, just quiet boundaries. When I finished, the screen looked different, simpler, quieter, peaceful. I exhaled slowly. That felt good, I admitted. Jonah leaned against the doorframe, watching me. Yeah, he said, boundaries usually do. I took another sip of tea, then something else surfaced. A memory, the words I had said the night before. I'm writing a memoir. I sat up straighter. I meant that, I said suddenly. Jonah raised an eyebrow, smiling slightly. I know you did. No, I really meant it, I insisted. Like I have to do this. Because it wasn't just about the dinner anymore, it was about everything, every moment I had been dismissed. Ignored, minimized, every time I had questioned my own worth. I don't even know where to start, I admitted. Jonah walked over, setting his empty mug down. Start where it hurts the most, he said simply. I looked at him. That's a lot of places, I said. He smiled. Then you've got a lot to say. And somehow that didn't feel overwhelming. It felt right. Later that day, after Jonah left for work, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. The cursor blinked on a blank document. Waiting. For a long time, I just stared at it. Because this wasn't just writing, this was truth, and truth had consequences. I thought about my father's warning, you'll be cut off. I thought about my siblings, the messages. The silence that would follow, and then I thought about something else. That little girl, 8 years old, holding a certificate, waiting to be seen. I took a slow breath and started typing. The words hit me before the meaning did. Once I began, I couldn't stop. It poured out of me, messy, raw, unfiltered, not polished, not perfect, but real. Hours passed without me noticing. Memories I hadn't thought about in years surfaced. Moments I had buried, excused, minimized. I wrote them all, not to punish anyone, but to finally stop pretending they didn't matter. By the time Jonah came home, I was still at the table. Same position, same focus. He paused in the doorway. "How long have you been sitting there?" he asked. I blinked, disoriented. "I don't know," I admitted. He walked over, glancing at the screen. "How much did you write?" I looked down, scrolled. 23 pages, I said, surprised. He let out a low whistle. "Yeah," he said, "you meant it." I smiled. For the first time, this didn't feel like something I was chasing. It felt like something I was becoming. That night after he fell asleep, I picked up my phone again, not to check messages, but to send one to my editor. We had talked before, briefly, casually. I had mentioned the idea once. Never seriously. Until now, I opened a voice memo and started talking. No script, no plan, just truth about the dinner, about my family, about the story I needed to tell. I hit send at 2:03 a.m. Then lay back in bed, staring at the ceiling again. But this time, everything felt different, not heavy, open, like something had finally started. The next morning, my phone buzzed, a new message. From my editor, Coffee Monday, I want to hear everything. I stared at the screen, then smiled. This was real. I wasn't just walking away anymore, I was moving forward. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't asking for permission. That Monday morning felt different from anything that came before it, not because something external had changed, but because I had. I walked into the cafe 10 minutes early, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder, my pulse steady but strong, not nervous, not hesitant, ready. My editor, Claire, was already there. She spotted me immediately and raised a hand. "Melis," she said, standing up as I approached. "You look different." I smiled slightly as I sat down. "I think I am." She studied me for a moment, then leaned forward. "Okay," she said, "tell me everything." So I did: the dinner, the years leading up to it, the silence, the breaking point. And then the decision. "I'm writing it," I said, "all of it." Claire didn't interrupt once, she just listened, focused, intent. When I finished, she sat back slowly. "That's not just a story," she said. "That's a movement." I blinked. "A movement?" I repeated. "Yes," she said firmly, "because it's not just about your family." She pointed lightly toward me. "It's about every person who's ever been made to feel like they weren't enough in their own home." Something in my chest tightened again, but this time it wasn't pain, it was purpose. "We need to do this right," Claire continued. "Not rushed, not diluted." I nodded. "I don't want it softened," I said. "I don't want it polite." "Good," she replied. "Because the truth rarely is." That meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end of it, I had a timeline, a structure, a plan, and for the first time, a contract, a real one. Not something I had to fight for, not something I had to prove I deserved, something that was offered because my voice had value. The next 8 months became something I can only describe as intense. Not chaotic, not overwhelming, but consuming. I wrote every day. Some days the words came easily, flowing, natural. Other days they fought me because writing the truth meant reliving it. Moments I had buried came back sharp, clear, unavoidable. The night my father dismissed my writing. The phone call where he cut me off. The quiet ways my siblings learned to follow his lead. The worst part wasn't the big moments. It was the small ones, the consistent ones. The way being ignored became normal. The way silence became a language. The way I learned to question myself before anyone else had to. There were nights I had to stop, close the laptop, step away. Not because I couldn't continue, but because I finally understood what I had gone through. And that realization took time to process. Jonah never pushed. He didn't ask for pages. Didn't ask for updates. He just stayed, sometimes sitting quietly beside me while I worked, sometimes pulling me away when he could see I needed it. "Break," he'd say gently. And for once I listened, because this wasn't about proving anything anymore, it was about healing and telling the truth. When the first full draft was done, I didn't celebrate, I just sat there. Looking at it, all those pages, all those years, finally out of my head. "You did it," Jonah said softly from behind me. I shook my head slightly. "No," I said. I told it, and somehow that felt bigger. 3 weeks before publication, the email came. Subject line, legal notice, cease and desist. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. It was exactly what I expected. Formal, aggressive, carefully worded. Accusations of defamation, threats of legal action, demands to halt publication immediately. My father's name wasn't directly on it, but it didn't need to be. I read it once, then again, and then I forwarded it to my lawyer. His response came within the hour. "This is weak." I blinked. Then another message followed. "Truth is an absolute defense. If everything you've written is accurate or supported, they have no case." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. So, I typed back. His reply came almost instantly. So they're trying to scare you. I stared at the screen, and for the first time I didn't feel afraid, I felt steady. Do we respond? I asked. No need, he wrote. Let them realize it won't work. And just like that, the power shifted. 2 weeks later, the notice was quietly withdrawn, no follow-up. No escalation, just silence. The same silence I had lived in for years. Only this time it didn't control me. The book launched on a Tuesday in October. No dramatic event. No overwhelming expectations, just a quiet release into the world. By Friday, everything had changed. 3 bestseller lists. I stared at the numbers in disbelief. This doesn't make sense, I said to Jonah, holding my phone. He smiled. It makes perfect sense. I looked at him. It's just my story. He shook his head. No, he said. It's their story too. He wasn't wrong. Messages started coming in. Emails, reviews, letters from strangers, people I had never met but somehow understood completely. I thought I was the only one. This is my family. You said everything I never could. I read every message, not because I had to, but because I needed to understand what this had become. It wasn't just a book anymore. It was a mirror, a voice, permission, and that mattered more than any number, more than any list, because for the first time, my story wasn't being dismissed. It was being heard. Success didn't feel the way I thought it would. There was no moment of overwhelming victory, no dramatic sense of I've won. Instead, there was quiet. Not the heavy, suffocating silence I had grown up with, but something lighter, peaceful, like a room that had finally been aired out after years of being closed. The book was out in the world now. And it was doing more than well. It was being read, talked about, shared, but the part I hadn't fully prepared for was what came next, because truth doesn't just set you free, it moves, it spreads. And eventually, it reaches the people it was written about. My father never contacted me directly, not a call, not a message, nothing. At first, I wondered what that meant. Was it anger, pride? Denial? Then I realized it didn't matter. For once, his silence wasn't something I needed to interpret. It wasn't something I needed to fix, it was just his, and I was done carrying it. Lauren was the first to reach out. 6 weeks after the book was published, an email, subject line, I hope you're satisfied. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won. It was short, sharp. Carefully controlled, you've embarrassed all of us. This was unnecessary. I hope you're happy. I read it once, then again, and waited for something to rise. Anger, guilt, regret. But none of it came. Instead, I felt calm. Not because it didn't matter, but because I finally understood something I hadn't before. Her reaction wasn't about me. It was about losing control of the narrative. For years, they had decided what was true, what counted, what was remembered, and now they couldn't anymore. I opened a reply, typed slowly, carefully. I'm not happy, I paused, then finished the sentence. But I'm free, there's a difference. I hit send, and that was it. No argument, no back and forth, just truth. Bryce never wrote, not once. But I heard things, through mutual connections, through quiet conversations that made their way back to me. He had been asked to step back from a board position, nothing public, nothing dramatic. Just quiet distance. Apparently someone had recognized parts of my book, connected them to real events, real work, work that had once been presented as his. And when those questions started, he didn't have answers, not real ones, not anymore. My father's consequences were even quieter. He resigned from 2 nonprofit boards, no explanation. No announcement, just a polite withdrawal, the kind that doesn't invite questions but still answers them because people had read the book and people talk, not loudly, not directly, but enough. Enough for patterns to be noticed, enough for reputations to shift. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't need to shout, it just needs to exist. And eventually, it settles exactly where it belongs. 1 year later, everything looked different, not because the past had changed, but because I had. I stood in the nursery of our home just outside Seattle, gently rocking my daughter as soft rain tapped against the window. The room smelled faintly of lavender, warm, safe. Peaceful in a way my childhood home had never been. Her name was Iris June Harper. Iris for resilience, for the kind of strength that comes back again and again, no matter what tries to break it. June for new beginnings. She was 6 weeks old, tiny, perfect, and already she held onto my finger with a grip that felt impossibly strong, like she already knew how to hold on to what mattered. Jonah appeared in the doorway holding a cup of tea. Everyone's here, he said softly. I smiled. Our living room was filled with people, not relatives, not obligations, but chosen family. Jonah's parents, my coworkers, friends who had shown up again and again without conditions, without expectations, just love. There were string lights across the walls. A small cake on the table that read, Welcome Iris, no speeches, no pressure, no performances, just presence, and for the first time that felt like enough, more than enough. Later that night, after everyone had left, I found it, an envelope, resting quietly near the door, no return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately, my father's. I stood there for a long moment, turning it over in my hands. wondering what it said, what it meant, what had finally made him right. Then I walked to the drawer in the hallway, opened it, and placed the letter inside. Unopened, not out of anger, not out of spite, but because I didn't need it. I had already heard everything I needed to hear, in silence, in absence, in truth. And I had already answered it, with my life. That night I sat beside Iris's crib, watching her chest rise and fall in soft, steady rhythm. I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who tried to earn love, the one who believed she had to become someone else to be accepted, the one who thought she was the problem. I leaned closer, brushed a soft kiss against her forehead, and whispered the words I had needed my entire life. You are already enough, my voice softened. You don't have to earn love, a breath, it's yours completely. Always, and as I said it, I realized something. I wasn't just saying it to her, I was finally saying it to myself, to the child I had been, to the woman I had become. To the voice I had finally found. I don't talk to my father anymore. I don't need to, because thousands of people talk to me now, not as a daughter seeking approval, but as someone who gave them permission to walk away, to set boundaries, to stop performing for people who would never appreciate the effort. That's not revenge, it's something else. Something quieter, stronger, justice. Because in the end, the most powerful thing you can do is not make them regret losing you. It's to build a life so full, so honest, so yours that their absence no longer matters. And the truth, that's the kind of ending I used to read about. Now it's the one I'm living.